but I don't know, Mike, whether you actually ever got officially introduced. So why don't you introduce yourself, and then Karen, you can introduce yourself.
Hey, hello everybody. This is Mike Arduser. I'm in St. Louis. Been working on bees for a long time in the Midwest and developing keys for Midwestern bees with the help of a lot of people, and do workshops periodically on Midwestern bees. And that's it.
Okay. Thanks, Mike. Claire, I'm not seeing Mike's picture on my screen.
Wait.
I was just going to say that.
Okay.
What about? Okay.
There we go.
Hello.
Yeah, I didn't.
Hello.
All right.
Okay. Karen, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Karen Wright. I'm currently at Texas A&M University, where I'm the associate curator of the insect collection here. It's one of the largest insect collections in the country that's university-based. So I'm kept quite busy with my collection manager job. But for the past 2 decades, I've been working on bees in New Mexico. Working on all the bees, but then for my PhD, I did a very specific targeted work on Melissodes, doing a phylogeny of Melissodes and evolution of their diet breadth. So I've got a lot of background on identifying female Melissodes, because that's what I did all my PhD work on. And I can agree with everybody that they are a bugger to do.
We don't want to hear that, Karen. We want to hear that you figured it all out.
No, I still struggle with them, man. It's been 20 years, so.
Okay. All right, but things can be, you can divine species. So we don't want to discourage all the people on here from, from looking at that.
No, and LaBerge's keys do work. They are, but they're not keys. I call it LaBerge's maze. But they do work. You just have to be incredibly careful about reading each couplet. Even though it's a paragraph long, you have to read it all the way to the end and go through every single couplet. So it's tedious and it's slow, but that key is good and it works.
Yeah. So he had what was the number of series that he had? Did he have 3?
3, yep.
3
separate publications.
So Claire, maybe we can put on our list to try and track down PDFs of those if we haven't already, so we can make them available. They're a little bit difficult to find. So
yeah, well, the smallest one is just this big, but the other 2 are about this big.
Yeah, and they're around as PDFs too, but I think it would be good for the community of people who struggle. And and Karen is right. I have to say, I didn't have the patience to spend a whole lot of time with LaBerge's keys. And Mike, you probably knew Wally enough to just talk to him about things?
A little bit. And an interesting thing, and maybe Karen knows this, after he passed away, his basically all his notes went to John Marlin. And so Wally made over the years annotations on all his Andrena and Melissodes publications, and John has all that, and I've looked at it, and it's enlightening.
Oh.
And we think it would be beneficial. I don't know how we could do this, but basically to go through those and integrate his comments and edits, because there are a lot of edits in those publications, where people can see it.
When I was working on my dissertation, I tried to get my hands on those, but was unable to convince anybody that I could look at them for a while. For instance, the male Melissodes key never got finished. And so it's published, but it leaves off at couplet 9, even though there should be at least 10 more, 15 more couplets.
All right. So, Mike, do you know John? Can we?
Oh yeah.
Could you ask him to just scan them in, or something like that, or we could pay for that?
Well, John, we've talked about this, but we're talking thousands of pages, truthfully, when you look at all.
I think it doesn't do anyone any good just to be parked in John's house, right?
Yeah,
And then it burns down. I mean,
Yeah.
it may not burn down, but you know what I mean, talking
I
about.
know exactly. Yeah, I will open the discussion with John and again and just see what we can do. I know he'd be on. He's in favor
Well,
of that.
and then there's these places if he could organize them to some level, and we don't even need it completely organized because you can take apart a scan. And I know that's not what we're supposed to be talking about today, but I think this would be incredibly valuable, and we could hire someone to, who would professionally do it.
Okay.
If you could, I have had very brief conversations with him over the years, but I think you sound like you know him better.
Yeah, we communicate regularly, and he's busy, but I'll touch base with him.
Yeah, well, this would be a very little work for him, and so we don't want to burden it, and that also, delays because procrastination, blah, blah, blah. But just hire someone to do it. And you can put him in touch with me if it comes down to, like.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So female Melissodes. So we had, Karen, 2 sessions, and other people know this too. We had 2 sessions of male Melissodes. We looked through a lot of it was more, I would say, character and struggle based rather than going into minutia on, like going through each of the species and going into minutia there, which was useful, but in the broad sense, we just don't have time for that. So my suggestion would be that we approach the females in a fairly similar way, where we look at what are the important characters. I have a collection it's small right now, of mostly Eastern, but I do have a few Midwestern ones in there too that we can bring up as examples for these things. So I think that getting people used to the kinds of couplets, and we can use LaBerge things, but also anything else in Discover Life or in Mike or Karen that you think are important to show, and then I'll futz around here with the microscope, and I'm going to basically turn things more over to you guys, and I'll pipe up with whatever experience I might have had too. So do you have a particular set of characters you want? We should have discussed this before, obviously, but do you have a particular set of characters that you want, or species groups that we should tackle first?
Yeah, we could just start with all the small subgenera and then get those out of the way, and then there you got the Melissodes left over, and that's all the other nightmares. Yep. I do have some tips for some rather troublesome groups that tend to look similar, but yeah, I mean, I think if we just start out similar to what you did with the males, we can start out with Melissodes, if that's all right.
And so that's the apicata and mitchelli.
And fimbriata.
Okay, I don't have fimbriata. And isn't that the one with reduced scopal hairs? I'm going to get a specimen.
I thought fimbriatus was the one with the incredibly long galea that's like 3 times as long as the eyeball. So you can't confuse it with anything else. And then for the other groups, so you have these, for Melissodes, basically, if the hairband is apical, absolutely apical, not up higher in a curved arc on each of the segments, then it's probably Melissodes. Now, there is another big group called Melissodes, but they're almost entirely Western. And so if you're working on Eastern bees and you have apical hairbands, it's probably Melissodes. And then
I'm going to mention that we are going to try to convince Karen to talk about Western Melissodes at some point, but because there's a lot of interest because it's, they're common everywhere. So go ahead.
Yeah. So you can see the hairbands aren't pushed up towards the middle of the segment. They're right at the end. And then once you know it's an Melissodes, then all you have to do is look at the tongues, and they're so completely different that you can't really confuse any of the species. So fimbriatus's tongue is 3 times as long as its eyeballs. So I guess that would only make my tongue about that big because I have small eyeballs relatively to the bees. But they have really long tongues, so it looks like it goes all the way down to the middle of their middle of their thorax. And then if it has a normal sized tongue, if it has hooked hairs on it and the tongue looks really sloppy and has all these short hooked hairs on it, then it's apicatus. And if it doesn't have hooked hairs, then it's mitchelli. And Bailey is the only one that I'm unfamiliar with. So I don't know if anybody knows much about that one. It's not very common. I think it's very northeastern.
Which one is it? Bailey?
Is it Bailey?
That's not ringing a bell at all.
The 4th species of Melissodes.
Yeah, I've not seen it. Mitchelli is a southeastern, basically sand specialist, often on dunes. But what is that other one? Mike, do you know that one?
That doesn't ring a bell with me either, Sam.
Yeah, it's Bailey, and actually, it's not northeast. It's Texas only. So,
oh, okay.
But I've never collected it here, and it's only got 2 dots on the Discover Life map, so not very common.
And do you think it's a legit species?
I have never found it and never bothered to key it out, so I don't know how much it differs from the other 3 species. But if somebody starts finding a bunch of them that key out to Bailey, I'd be interested to see them.
Yeah, I wonder if it's possibly another, if it has another niche, like is it in the western sand dunes of Texas or something like that, which would mean it'd be in Mexico, New Mexico too, but I guess we don't know.
Yeah.
All right, so
okay, we need to backtrack a little bit. That went really fast. We don't know what you have underneath the microscope and why.
Yep. So this is Kelly.
There we go.
The microscope, and I'll put it back under because we, we can spend sessions doing this. We probably should, but the this is this small group that has hair bands that are right along the tergal rims, like you see here. And one is a pickerel weed specialist, one is a deep sand southeast specialist. Fimbriata is, what's it doing with that long tongue? Is it an Enothera thing?
I've collected it in Oklahoma off things that used to be called, well, now they're Enothera. Okay. But I never saw pollen on them, but they were at the flowers early in the morning.
Okay. And yeah, people should remember that there are bees that are out very early in the morning that you may miss if you're not out early in the morning too. And then Bailey, we have no idea, but it's a small group and it is just easy. You want a group like this, easy to ID. So should we, so Claire, do you think we're good? Can we move to another group?
Well, the thing that was going so fast was the fimbriatus, super long tongue, the other one. So what was the distinctive feature about mitchelli, and do you have any of the other ones to show so I could at least give a screenshot of them for later?
I don't have any of the females. I gave away a lot to Lawrence Packer recently to work on some molecular stuff, and so my collection is really sparse right now, so I don't have any of the others in a female.
Okay.
But
so what was the distinctive nature of this one and its tongue compared to the other two?
It has a short tongue that's not modified. So the fimbriata is very, very long tongue. Mitchelli is like most of the other species, relatively short. And then the apicata is a pickerel weed specialist, and it has hooked hairs at the tip of its fairly long tongue too, but they're different because they have little hooks on them, so it can apparently hook out the pickerel weed pollen, which needs a hook to get out efficiently. And the other pickerel weed specialist bees, of which there are 2 others, but they're not Melissodes, they also have hooks on the tips of their tongue. So it seems to be an important thing. Okay, how's that, Claire? Good?
Yep, I think we addressed everything.
Okay.
Thank you for backtracking.
Yeah. So you guys, what else? What's the next group that we should take a look at?
Do you have silent Melissodes and tortoise?
I don't.
Okay. Well, that's that whole actually that entire subgenus, which is just one species, just in tortoise, is going to go away any minute now. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. But the females, you can tell them from most of the other species of female Melissodes because T1 through T3 all have a hyaline apical edge to them. So rather than be opaque and non-see-through, these are light so that you can almost see through the edges of each of those segments 1 through 3.
Similar to a lot of males, Melissodes.
Yes.
So is it the only female that has the hyaline or clear-ish or transparent rims?
No, but yet again, the other 3 species that have that are mostly Western. Sapinellus, Velutina, and one other one that starts with a V.
Okay.
But I think they're entirely Western.
Okay. Yep.
Well, one thing I'd add about in tortoise is the tegula is atypical for Melissodes. It's not tapered anteriorly. And so in that sense, it doesn't even look like a normal, the rest of Melissodes because of that. But, and it's also a specialist on Calaroe, poppy mallow, which you never find, at least I never find other Melissodes in the East visiting.
And I think poppy mallow kind of peters out as you move to the East Coast anyway.
I think so, yes. Yeah.
Okay. What next? Karen, you're in the driver's seat here.
All right. Then the next smallest group is Heliomelissodes. You can tell these from almost all other Melissodes. For one, there's only 2 species. One's Eastern, one's Western. And they're both rather big for Melissodes, almost approaching Sebastra size.
Mm-hmm.
And they both have incredibly dark hairs on the sternum and the inside of the hind basitarses, almost black, really, really dark brown. And I don't think that there's a few species of Melissodes and Melissodes sensu strictu that have that combination, but not too many.
Right. So what's the Eastern species? I don't know subgenera well.
Desponsus.
Okay.
Okay, let me pull that one. You can mention that's a thistle specialist.
Yeah, I guess I wasn't aware that it was a thistle specialist, but
well, I think of it as a thistle specialist.
Oh, yeah, I do too, Sam, at least over here.
Yeah, and I don't know what its distribution is in Texas. Is it really a Texas bee too?
Which
is desponsus get down to Texas?
Oh, I don't think so. Both Rivalis and desponsus tend to be northern, and they meet right in the middle in the Dakotas. It's the worst place to look at the 2 of them because you get both of them up in the Dakotas and that area. So far north, it's difficult because you got both. But basically here you can see that desponsus definitely does not have any complete hair bands. Occasionally there will be some whitish hairs that start on the outside edge of the abdomen, but they rarely ever meet in the middle.
Yeah.
Whereas Rivalis definitely has distinctive white hair bands.
It's a little bit similar to Dentroventris, which is not in that same group, but Dentroventris can be almost entirely dark hair with these little patches of white hair bands, but probably more. I can't remember all the details on telling those 2 apart, but it is, and I don't think they have as wide of an unpitted rim here. I forget now.
Yeah, Heliomelissodes, both species, Rivalis and desponsus, have very few minute punctures on the apical halves of the terga.
Yeah, the recessed portion of the terga is is wide. You can see here to here, and then just that lack of pale hair. So there's dark hairs on there. And you can see on the inside of the base tarsus, all the very black hairs that Karen mentioned right here. And that's unusual. Although I think of Comptoides as also, which looks very different, as also having that area very dark. And there's a little hint sometimes for me, like, oh yeah, that's definitely not communis.
Yeah, both Comptoides has a little bit darker hair, but it's still an orange brown, yeah. not a black brown.
So we can, now that we have a tongue poking out here, I have no idea what desponsus has for, and people should be aware that there was some gender changing Latin going on with Melissodes a little while ago. Thank you, Doug Yeniga. So desponsus, as we're saying, used to be desponsa. And there's several other, a fair number of the species got shifted their endings, if you're wondering. This looks mostly smooth to me. I don't know if that's critical, but a lot of times for like Comptoides and communis, we look at the tongue architecture or the amount of dullness on there, but I don't know if desponsus is a very distinct bee, so I don't know that there's too much to worry about here in terms of, and I'm also having some lighting issues on this, but it looks basically smooth to me.
Yeah, so Melissodes sensu strictu and Melissodes only have shiny reflective tongues.
Okay.
You only get the shagreen tongues in Melissodes and Melissodes.
Ah, okay.
I see Karen already responded to this in the chat, but I wanted to make sure that it gets heard for recording purposes. It seems there are many Melissodes specialists. Is that the case? The previous Melissodes species is a specialist on pickerelweed. Melissodes desponsus is a specialist on thistle. And Karen responds, most Melissodes are Asteraceae specialists. Most Melissodes sensu strictu are polyletic. So do you guys want to elaborate on that at all?
If you want a very detailed look into the evolution of diet breath in the entire genus, you can look at my dissertation. It's available online from the University of New Mexico repository for dissertations. So all the details are in that. But basically when it comes down to it is that the entire clade of Melissodes sensu strictu are all generalists. And then most Melissodes, or most Melissodes, tend towards being specialists on Asteraceae, mostly the Helianthus alliance, which is the all the sunflowers. But the other big group is the the North American clade of Helianthae, which are the smaller composites with the little flowers. And so there are these two big clades of Asteraceae, which is why I'm sure I included desponsus in my work, but I didn't have enough data to convince myself that it was a thistle specialist, because none of the other Melissodes that I know of are specialists on the Carduoidea, which is the group of Asteraceae that the thistles belong to. So I found no evidence of specialization within either the Chicoroidea, which are the lettuces and dandelions, or the Carduoidea, which are the thistles.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, it is, based on experience and sort of word of mouth, it's a thistle specialist, although perhaps this should be clarified, but I just don't think I see them anywhere else except on thistles.
Yeah, I don't either, Sam.
So, anyway, we're just so people know, a lot of this specialization is based on observational rather than quantitative things. So some things that are not on a list of specialists probably should be because they're just not seen well enough. And some of the other things that are on specialist lists maybe should be bumped down. But all these bees have preferences, and whether they're really narrow, like I only go to pickerelweed, or broader, is sort of, you have to put your finger somewhere on that slider to come up with an idea of whether you're highly specialized or just, have like certain flowers. Additionally, they're out at different times of the year, mostly Melissodes in the east, and I'm not sure what goes on in the west, but is a late summer bee. And Eucera are the long antennaed group that dominates spring faunas. Karen, what do you find out west? Is it similar?
Sorry, I was looking at my data on the Melissodes desponsus, and it turns out that none of my amplifications were successful. So while it may have been collected on Cirsium echium, which is a borage, Antirrhinium andacus, which is an apiaceae, so it was collected on these plants. That's what the label data said. But I didn't get any of the pollen DNA to amplify, so I couldn't confirm that whether or not it was collecting pollen from those other groups or not.
Yeah, well, if you want more specimens, just let us know.
That work is done, believe me.
We also are wondering, in what literature can one find the specialist and generalist lists?
So Mike has a list, and I don't know, Mike, if you're would like to share that at some point, but Clare has a big file space for just odds and ends things. And then Jared Fowler has produced a series of lists for Eastern, Central, and Western. Their websites, 2 papers though, are also involved. And he updates them regularly when someone says, oh, this should be this, but not that, or include this, and that kind of thing. So if you look up, and Jared is Jarrod, so if you look up Jared Fowler specialist bees, you should be able to find those.
There's one from Ohio too, Sam. Melissa Spring.
Oh yeah.
I think she's the main author. Maybe Karen Goodell, maybe as well. But it's a very attractive publication on mostly Ohio specialist. But it does go a little further than the Ohio border, and it touches on some other states. So it's another very valuable.
But in terms of conservation and other things, I think it's an underused notion that plant lists and management activities probably should concentrate more on the specialists, because the generalists will just fall in line. And planting the same plants over and over again is only supporting, a portion of the total fauna. Most of you guys know that. All right, are we done with desponsus, or do we want to see anything else? Otherwise, I can move to another group. I don't have ribalis.
Okay, if you want, we can move on to Melissodes sensu strictu. If you have communis and comptoides and bimaculatus, maybe tepaneca, if you have that.
Yeah, I have all of those. So let's maybe start with bimaculatus.
That's the easy one.
Exactly. And let me make sure I put away the specimen in the right place. Okay. And I will let people know that I think there is another species that is a bimaculatus looking thing, and probably was just passed over, because bimaculatus is a incredibly abundant bee. It's just on all like flower gardens, and it's usually the most common thing that you get. You put up vein traps, you're gonna get tons of these. Just to denote one of the main features of this new thing, you're looking for females that don't have this white patch here, which is very indicative. And then there are several other characters who at this moment I can't remember what they are, that also separate out this possible additional species. I've seen it in several places now, but
Right. So you also have a few other species that of Melissodes sensu strictu that are all black. I can't remember if Maesta is one of those.
Oh, I wonder if it's possible that it is a Western species that is, I didn't even consider that, that it's a Western species that maybe is in the East. So we'll have to, further investigations warranted.
Yeah, and where you've been finding it, there are several Caribbean species that are entirely black.
Oh.
Lepriori and something like that.
Okay, they seem less likely because I'm seeing them in the mid-Atlantic, but I'm seeing them in, yeah, it's hard to say, you know, how prairie-like anything in the mid-Atlantic is, but I've seen them in large, let's call them large open areas with good floral presentation. Okay, well, that's good to know. I'll look for that, and there may be, it may be something new or maybe a Western species that they're unacknowledged.
Yeah, and look into Maesta. No, that's still too far west for you. So, yeah, but there's also a few other species that have very dark morphs. Now, bimaculatus is rather big for Melissodes, but there's a few others like Comptoides, which we'll get to in a little bit, has a very dark black morph down in Florida and Georgia area. I think the further north you get, the lighter colored it gets, but Comptoides can get quite dark as far as hair color goes.
Yeah. So we have some of those specimens. It'll be good to talk about those color morphs outside of the sort of standard ones, because a lot of times, you know, I look, oh, if it's got black on the scutum, it's, you know, much more likely or is going to be communis. And if it's got no black, it's Comptoides. But that we'll pan that. We'll talk about that in a second. But
and before you get rid of this guy here, just notice the two white spots. Bimaculata just means bi means two, and maculatus means spot. So there's two spots on the fourth tergum of absolutely white hairs, not yellowish, not ochreous, just white.
And these hairs are relatively white, and the male very white too, compared to a lot of the other groups. All right, I'm going to go. I've got tepaneca, so let me just show that, and then we'll get to Comptoides and communis.
Well, he's
right.
out. What was it about sensu strictu that you can pull those from your collection and be like, I know that they're in that group?
Well, the males are easy because they have an entirely yellow labrum, but that doesn't help with the females. Some of the species have spatulate hairs on T2, just like Sebastra does. They tend to have darker wing color. So if you see something that has a little bit of infumate wings, it tends to be Melissodes sensu strictu. And the hair bands tend to be really far away from the edge of the end of the tergal segment, not almost there like they are in most Melissodes. So see how these hair bands are super arched up, way more than twice their width away from the end of the tergite. Did I explain that very good?
I think we got notes.
Okay.
Yeah. So Karen, I would be, and Mike, I call this specimen tepaneca. Do you think it's the hair bands are recessed too far away to be that species?
No, that's exactly tepanecas.
Okay. All
So
right.
tepaneca, the difference is if you look at that T2 hairband, if you want to tell it apart from communis and Comptoides, in tepaneca, it is a straight line straight across the thing, whereas communis and Comptoides are both arched.
It would be closer at the far ends to the rim. here, and tepaneca looks like it even at the very far sides, it's still quite a distance from that rim edge, and there's not hardly or no arch across the T2.
And then if you look at the punctures, not only are they very coarse, but they're also very dense. So the punctures, especially on T2, and the punctures on that central area of the scutellum, or the scutum, are both very dense and very big punctures. And I'm saying this because if you're in Texas or further west, there's another species, Melissodes paracelae, which is almost identical to tepaneca, except it has less dense punctures, but it has that very straight hairband across T2.
Okay, ready for comptoides and communis. Common.
Very common. And tepaneca, if you live in the cotton belt, tepaneca is the most common bee in the cotton belt. And I think its populations are probably being enhanced by cotton production in the South. So
they're actually cotton pollinators, is what you're saying.
Well, they love cotton pollen. I know that. And so they are the most common bee in any cotton field.
Is pollination important for the production of cotton?
Not necessarily. It's, a domesticated variety of gossypium. And so it's not necessary to have pollination for cotton boll production, but you do get a much heavier boll, sometimes as much as twice as much boll per flower than you would if you don't have pollination.
Okay, I've got communis, and this is a Florida specimen, just FYI.
Yeah.
And you can see, let me just zoom in here a little bit more. It would have the smooth tongue thing, and you can see that there's much more of an arch here, although not super obvious on this rather dirty specimen.
Do you call that comptoides or communis?
I called it communis.
All right, because those punctures look pretty big on the end of T2.
Okay.
But maybe it's just what I'm seeing on the screen. So
Well,
communis shouldn't have very many punctures, and the punctures that it does have should be rather small.
Yeah, I usually go to look at the back of the scutum rather than the T2 on there. So let's see what T2 tells me here. And
that's definitely communis.
Yeah, so
I think it was a dirty specimen.
Oh, definitely dirty.
Yeah, so I call that, in my notes, it's because it's the way LaBerge thought of it. If the punctures are less than half of a puncture width apart, then that's comptoides.
Yeah.
If the punctures are between 1 and 2 puncture widths apart, then it's communis.
So Karen and Mike, do you want to talk about, I consider this to be a relatively usual case in terms of visually. Well, some of this hairband stuff is worn out. It's just often pretty light here to begin with, but we have black in a central portion of the scutum, and the majority, except for a light fringe of hairs around the edge. So how does that vary across their range, would you say?
Well, in the Midwest, Sam, I mean, with communis, there's always some amount, not necessarily as much as I'm seeing in this one, but it's always pretty obvious. And sometimes it gets a little pale compared to the real dark black you've got there. So it varies, but around most of the Midwest, it's always there, and I've never seen it in comptoides. It's always pale. Now that's just the Midwest.
Great.
So.
Well, I do know that comptoides has that super dark version down in Florida and northern Georgia. So if you're in that area, the thorax can be entirely black, and it's still comptoides, not bimaculatus. And
Okay,
so
I think I have, I'll just switch this quickly here to a Comptoides. And this is one I believe I collected off of Mangrove. And I think, Mike, you told me you also were down there once and collected them off of Mangrove. Let's see if you agree on this Florida specimen here as being Comptoides. So that's the butt end of the Comptoides from Florida, or at least what I was calling Comptoides. And let's move to the scutum, unless I put a communis in here by accident. But yeah, you can see it's very densely packed. But there also is, it's a little bit beat down, but these are dark hairs, and you saw the abdomen being dark too on that one. And then I'll transfer to a, oh, here's another Florida one, same thing. Let's go to a Michigan specimen. See if we got something that isn't as matted down here.
So if you have other characters like punctures and stuff like that, you should use those always before you use hair characters. Melissodes, the problems is a lot of the LaBerge key things have to do with the hair bands on the abdomen, but they get washed off very easily. And Sam, that's one of the reasons why I advise people, if they're interested in species level Melissodes, not to wash them and dry them the way, because it rubs so much of the hair off that you can't get them to species after they've been dried.
Yeah.
And so if you are going to wash them, be very, very gentle.
Well, Karen, you used glycol in your Western traps. How did you process them out of that glycol, which is?
I'm very good at identifying wet dogs.
Oh, okay. All right.
Not only that, but I just shake them in ethanol. So
okay.
I take them out of the glycol, I give them a good shake in ethanol, and then I just flip them upside down and lay them out on styrofoam to air dry.
Before pinning or after pinning?
Before pinning. And so I'll just let them air dry for about, maybe up to an hour or two, just to let the hair dry a little bit, and then go to pin them.
Okay. And you don't do any more hair prep, but they still.
Some folks have taken your drying, and I know that they're putting that on high because they get impatient, and they're putting that high heat on, and you can see the hairs look like they're burnt, and they get curled and they're stubby at the end, and you know that those hairs have just been burnt off.
Wow, wow. Yeah, that must smell bad too.
Yeah. Well, I don't think as bad as human hair, but anyway.
Different chemical composition.
Yeah, so using the drying method, as long as you do it very gently and on cold air, not high heat, then washing can make the bees look a lot better.
Well, we now tumble dry them in a dryer rather than do that in. Oh, you know what? This is, I think, not Comptoides. I think this is communis. Look at the pit spacing there. So let's. Oh, I'm in the communis box. Duh. No wonder I was like finding nothing there. Okay, back to the. Here's one from Maryland.
While Sam pulls that up, I want to interrupt with something from the chat. Laurel contributed that Sarah Cusser's thesis reports Melissodes tepaneca on cotton in Texas out of the UT Austin. And they published on cotton ball yield increase as a result of cross-pollination.
Yeah.
So just going back to what was talked about.
Yeah, so it doesn't increase the number of bolls, but it increases the weight of each boll.
Yeah.
And there's if you're interested in cotton, there's a few other publications by Paris and Isaac Esquivel on cotton, bees in cotton.
Yeah, it seems to be that's one of that clade of plants, like soybeans don't need to have pollination, but if bees visit them, the yield in weight increases. Anyway, so here's Comptoides from Maryland. And you can see a lot more white on the rear end. And this configuration back here where there's a dark patch in both communis and Comptoides is often a strong indicator for me. Big Melissodes, lots of white back here, and a dark patch. If you have good hair, is allows me to morpho sort them pretty quickly into their own pile. Not definitive, but useful. Let's see if we can see the scutum pitting again.
And I usually use the pitting on T2 because it is so very drastically different between Comptoides and communis. Communis has, if you get it at the right light, it has a few punctures that you can see there, but they're barely pinpricks. Whereas Comptoides looks like somebody took a pin and jabbed at it for a while.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think that we tend to emphasize the spacing on the scutum because is it a deep pit or puncture, or is it a shallow pit or puncture? Often is one of those things that you gain experience with, but when you just have one specimen or you're just starting out, it becomes confusing. So I think we include both, but I tend to emphasize the scutum spacing. So I think this shows that this Comptoides, in addition to being all light hair, this is, I think, that Maryland specimen, has very closely spaced pits throughout the scutum area here.
I think one other thing to point out, Sam, is that when you're talking about Melissodes and pitting on the scutum, it's always in the central apical end of the scutum, not up towards the head. So you definitely want to look at the bottom half of the scutum and then the central portion, not the edges. Because at least for LaBerge's characters, that's all they're talking about, because you can see up at the top part of this picture how dense those are, and they're just as dense on communis up that far high. You're really looking at the bottom half of the scutum.
Yeah, and Karen's right too. Often this area is just really matted down, and it's very difficult. You have to scrape them off, and so what you want to do is to be looking at both sets of pitting, and that's where all the action is on this group. Once you know that it's in that cluster of Comptoides or communis, you're looking at pitting basically. Everything else is just a hint, because you can see
if you're going to get good at Melissodes, you have to get good at shaving bees.
Yeah.
You have to shave their tegula to see if they're Melissodes in the first place. Then you have to shave a lot of their other parts to see that punctures.
Okay, we have about 10 minutes. What do we want to tackle in that last 10 minutes?
I actually do not have to cut it immediately at 2, so we have the time that you want.
You're just letting your child wander around the streets?
That is what I'm going to do. He can walk down the street like the 6-year-old he is.
Well, why don't we start with everybody's worst problem, especially if you're in north central United States, Agilis and Trinotus.
Oh my God.
I mean, they are the worst. If you're in the Northeast or the Midwest, good luck.
Right.
The males are much easier to tell apart than the females.
Really? Because, well, actually, Mike and I had a long discussion about that. And so not to go back into male land, but I find that the females are much easier. But let's get into it. So let me pull And actually, you identified these. This is from the South Dakota. And let me pull an Agilis here. And let's see, I had some marked.
Yeah, the Dakotas area, that's the worst. That's where you get both of them.
Yeah.
Same as the desponsus and bivalus too. It's a messy place to do bees.
But beautiful.
Oh gosh, yeah. And
Okay.
They're doing a lot of bee work in Montana now as well.
Oh, wow. Eastern Montana?
All of Montana. Mike Ivy's got a big thing going on, as and the Montana Game and Fish, or whatever they're called, or USDA, some other group, government group is starting big bee surveys.
Yeah, good. I mean, that's always been a hole. Eastern Montana, like there's almost no records of anything.
Yeah.
Okay, do you want to start with the abdomen, or would you rather me go?
Yeah, let's just start with those same sputum punctures that we were just looking at. So again, just like communis versus comptoides, trinotus, the punctures are very close together. And I'm talking about the sputum more.
What?
Yeah, the sputum, very similar to comptoides. The sputum here has the punctures almost right next to each other.
Okay, this is Agilis.
Oh, okay. Then there should be 1 to 2 spaces between the punctures.
Okay. I don't know. This is a problem with this group in particular.
Shaving bees.
Yeah, you would have to shave it. But just a general.
A general overall is that Agilis is yellow, yellow, yellow. Yellow hair, yellow wing veins, like really orangish yellow wing veins. The inside of the hind basitarsus is yellow-red. There's almost no dark hairs on Agilis most of the time.
Right. Yeah, so we'll look at the wing veins here a little bit. And sometimes, again, this is where collections come in, right, Karen? Is you need collections to is that light brown to peach, or is that brown, Yeah. So
well, you always need a reference collection, and if you're starting, especially in an area that's been undersampled previously, the first thing you need to do is get your bees confirmed IDs by an expert, and then compare them to specimens in a collection somewhere. Then you can develop your own reference collection with reliable IDs on them, and then you're on your own. But it takes a lot to build up your own reference collection. So.
It's interesting that you said about the pitting on these specimens. I had not used that myself.
Yeah. So
does that go for males too?
I don't know. I don't think so. Males tend to be much less pitted to begin with than females. So I don't think they're nearly as regular, but I've never looked at male pitting, so I don't know.
Okay. So I'm just showing here, trying to show that the abdomen, this is what and I think, Mike, you do the same. I look at the abdomen, I look for the hairs that are between the hair bands, particularly between the towards the base, and they're almost always light colored, and it doesn't show super well here, but we spend a lot of time looking at things from the side where the hairs show up better, although not in this picture so much. But here's the problem, like if you are looking at this section and if you look straight down, that looks like those could be dark hairs, because you're seeing them through they're seeing the integument from behind. So a lot of times you have to wave your specimen back and forth, but I almost never, again, speaking from the far east here, see just something other than just light hairs. I don't see that many Agilis in the east, frankly. I see almost all trinotus.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else on this Agilis, or should I
Just
get a trinotis out?
one note for people in the Midwest or further west than that, subagilis is also in this complex, easy to confuse. So both trinotis and agilis have incredibly chagrined galea. So the mouth parts look like sandpaper. They're incredibly rough. They don't reflect light. They're very dull. And subagilis is like that too. It is dull. But on T3 here, you can see that there's a light hairband, and then the hair is less dense apical to that. Whereas in subagilis, that light hairband will go all the way to the end of the segment. And that's just T3.
I have some subagilis right here. Maybe I'll just whip that out from the Badlands again.
Yeah, and I don't know if you were able to show the chagrined galea in the males.
Oh, we did, but here I'll pull this out because this one has its tongue nicely. This is a subagilis, and so it's not this. What I can't remember that name. It's this section here. You can see how it's just not reflecting light, and if you look closely, there's inscribed microscopic lines.
Yeah, that's good.
Very reptilian, all through that. So again, this section here with a few pits, not this section, but these are the outer sheathing or galea. Maybe I'll turn it a little bit, see if we can see that a little bit better from the side.
Elliot wonders, is subagilis lighter, whiter hairs generally?
Yes, in general, yes. So it's more whitish, whereas agilis is more leaning towards yellow. But there's this, how do you pronounce that, Sam? Ochreus or ochreus?
Ochraceous?
Ochraceous. So that's the word LaBerge uses all the time, which means that it's not quite white and it's not quite yellow. It's somewhere in between. So unfortunately, but relatively, yes, subagilis leans towards the whitish end, but it's still ochreous, not pure white. And agilis leans towards the yellow, but still is not quite yellow, is more, just a darker yellow of this ochreous. Yeah.
Mike, how do you pronounce it?
Ochraceous, that's how I've always said it. But it's spelled different ways, ochreous and ochraceous. I've seen both.
Yeah.
Yeah, LaBerge used ochreous.
And it's like ferruginous, ochraceous, or and several other words. What's the sort of almost black but not quite a very dark brown? What is it? Fulginous. Yeah, those are words that we're trying to. In the disguise, we're trying to dial that out, just because. Who knows? Or testaceous, those are legitimate colors, but I think we had a conversation with someone on here, and we're going to try and go back and we're also very imprecise, dark brown, things like that. Comes up with a more precise color scheme that people understand.
And while we're talking about colors too, when I was rewatching your male video, one good way to tell most Melissodes apart from Eucera and Tetraloniella is the color of the antennae.
Oh.
Melissodes has almost always, not always, a lot of times, Melissodes has a very orange underside to the antennae. And most Eucera and Tetraloniella have black antennae.
Oh, that's very cool.
It's the hue again. It's like at the top end of this this tergite here, which is kind of brownish, not really black. That's as dark as Melissodes antennae will get. But Eucera and Tetralonia, it's almost black, like the darkest brown you can get to. And so these hues, I use those a lot, even for generic level IDs. So if I'm just looking through a bunch of bees and I see that orange streak on the antennae and it's not very dark brown, then I automatically put it in the probably a Melissodes pile.
Cool. So you mentioned here is Turgid 1, 2, and 3 in the subagilis.
Yep.
And as you mentioned, this white hairband is very broad and goes basically to the rim.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's just a little bit of an indent right in the middle there, and that's why in LaBerge's keys, it keys out in a completely separate part of the key, because that hairband is actually apical on T3, which is really important in his keys.
So I'm going to pull a Trinotis now. And so we'll take a look here, and you can see that the light hairbands are far away from are relatively far compared to subagilis, but also we'll try and get it to the side. Okay, I'm just going to talk from eastern bees mostly. Almost always, this may have a white hairband here, but this is T4. T4 almost always has dark hairs along the whole rim. What about you guys? Is that a thing where you are?
Most of the places, there's only that part up in the north Midwest to Northeast where agilis and Trinotis really blend in, and those hair characters are terrible.
We should give that part.
You get dark agilis and you get light Trinotis, and it's a mess. Everywhere else, those color patterns seem to hold up.
Mike, does that conform with your experience too?
Well, once you get up close to like northern Illinois, the northern part of the Midwest, that you start to see things that are mixed up like that. Now down here in the central and southern Midwest, it's almost always pretty obvious it's one or the other. But the further north you go, there's some strange things.
And what's your ratio of agilis to Trinotis?
In general, I'd say they're pretty much equal. Find them on the same plants at the same time.
Whereas in the Southwest, it's almost entirely agilis, and you don't get the Trinotis till you get further north.
Okay. Here, it's almost all Trinotis. There's almost no agilis. So, I think of agilis as a helianthus lover, but what about Trinotis? Karen, what's your stuff show?
I believe that Trinotis was also an Asteraceae specialist.
Perhaps broader ranging? I've
got it on Sympiotrichum, Solidago, Helianthus, Grandelia. And then also on Russian olive. Yeah. Huh. So only one example of non-Asteraceae out of 10 samples.
Okay.
So most likely an Asteraceae specialist.
Yep. All right. Anything else? We have Trinotis here. I spend, I think, most of the time, in the scheme of things, I look, and if I see a thorax that is every bit is light colored, pale hairs, so back of the head, a lot of times, a lot of these species will have a band of black hairs either towards the ocelli, or sometimes, like I think Druealis has a black ruff at the back, but it's a mix of light and dark. Other times there'll be a little spot of black hairs back here or in the scutellum, and other species have some ventral black hairs or black on the side, but I think of agilis and Trinotis as always being all light colored up here.
Yeah.
Is that your guys' opinion too?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So if I see that chagrined tongue, I know it's in just a few groups of Melissodes, and if it's got a shagreen tongue and an all yellow scutum, then it's Agilis or Trinotus.
Yep. Yep.
And then if it's a little whiter and that hairband goes all the way to the end, it's Subagilis. And then there's a few other Western species that can be confused with that one as well.
Yeah. And the Subagilis only gets to what, maybe Minnesota? It's really not an Eastern species.
Yeah, I think it was a Great Plains bee. I don't think we have any records from Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri.
Yeah, I know it's common in California, Colorado. So
Right.
probably there and west.
Mm-hmm. And here's the light colored antennae or lighter underneath kind of thing going on. Okay, and here's the darker brown. You know, it's the other one. What Agilis was brown or on that brown end of the spectrum, but you can see how dark the brown is here compared to the other one. So sometimes, yeah, you have to use a weight of evidence on these species groups that isn't necessarily as apparent in keys sometimes.
So I know it's after 1. Do you want to keep going on some other Eastern groups, or do you want to put the rest of the Melissodes discussion off till we can maybe have a...
I would say we've got another day, let's call it. So you want to do it next Wednesday? I think we've tried to not go on and on and on our hour-long sessions because some of us love it, that other people, I think, just get exhausted.
Yeah, so I'm available next Wednesday if you want to do that. We can go into some more Eastern Melissodes in detail and then maybe start to pull in some of the Midwestern stuff as well.
Okay.
But there is a group of Melissodes, all the really small Western white ones that are, I don't know if they're good species. So that's just where I leave it. I don't know.
Are those far Western ones? Or when you say Western, what geographic area are you talking about?
I consider Western west of the Rockies. Oh, sorry, west of the Mississippi. And so Western meaning all these tiny little ones. In LaBerge's key, they key out to couplet 55, which is all the ones like Subagilis that has that third tergal hairband almost down to the very apical end of the segment. And they're all small bees. They all have small wing lengths. And they're all this light ochreous color. And some of them have shagreening on the mouth parts. Some of them are shiny, and almost all of them are somewhere in between. So there seems to be this entire, what do you call it when it goes from one end to the other? Spectrum. Yeah. And every in between is there. So I don't know if it's all one species or if there's a bunch of cryptic species that we've never been able to tell apart.
Well, someone get on that.
Yeah.
Like all these things. Yeah, I know what you speak.
If only we could find people to pay us to get on that.
Exactly. So thank you very much, Karen and Mike. I learned some things here, as I always do with other people thinking about the same stuff. And we will revisit this on next Wednesday. Claire, are there any questions that we want to talk about that in the chats or anything?
No, we were just talking, Laurel and I were talking about how do we get a standardized color key on Discover Life, and she has a good idea that I will share with you that uses what is it? Werner's nomenclature of colors adapted to zoology, botany, chemistry, etc. That would be maybe a nifty thing if we could, hire somebody for that.
Right. Yeah, we've been basically very, let's call it common man in our color, what we color things. So it would be good to try and quantify that.
And LaBerge's keys do rely on fulvous versus fuchsias versus, not fuchsias, I think that's a pink.
Yeah.
Anyway, he
Those
does
pink
use all
Melissodes.
those different terms.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So, and because most people have no idea what, they have no visual of those. I think we've tried to avoid them, but we've just replaced it with some looser terms, that each time we try and describe something, we're going to say orangey yellow or the color of a brick or something, which isn't necessarily bad, better than fuscus probably, but I think we can do better too. So I like that. All right. If there's nothing else, I'll say we're good. And thanks, guys.
I'd say we're good.
Hey, thanks.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you. Oh, wait. Eric just asked, Mike, how are you developing your keys, species you found for sure in the Midwest?
Say that again. How am I?
Mike, how are you developing your keys, species you found for sure in Midwest?
Yeah, yes, but then also species that might be here. Like Subagillus is one, and I was lucky to get some specimens that Wally had identified. Things that like Karen said are just, when you first look at them, they all look totally the same. But the more you look at them, either something happens to you or you start to recognize that there are some differences. So yeah, I'm just basing my keys on, the species I find here in the Midwest, and then just peripherally. And usually the keys start with the real obvious stuff, like Karen was saying originally. Bimaculatus, communis, comptoides. Some of these things you don't need 50 characters to identify the species. They're just a small, sometimes just 1 or 2 characters will do it. But then you get into these things towards the end of the key that you almost need, you have to have comparative material, really, to understand. And
So I realized
next week, I think that's what we'll probably get into.
We did skip the few Melissodes that make it to the East Coast. And, one fun thing is that I've been finding tuckeri in Mississippi. I mean, I didn't think it would get way down there. So there might be some movement of bees now with climate changing and all that. But I certainly didn't expect Melissodes tuckeri to be all the way down in Mississippi. But Cat Paris is finding some really good stuff down there. Strange distributions that you wouldn't expect.
We found it in Illinois also, which was a surprise.
I know, and so it's got this really strange distribution, but it can't be confused with anything else.
Yeah, I think all the work that's now being done in southern Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, or the start of that, is going to be revealing, because a lot of times these distributions show up as blanks in that Gulf Coast area between Florida and Texas, and it may just not be the case. It may just be a lack of attention in collecting. So it's kind of exciting to have people down there who are doing things now. Karen, one last question. How's your car these days?
Well, I'm a complete sellout, Sam. I have a lap dog, and I now drive a white Yaris. I know it's terrible, but yeah, she died a few years after I got to Texas. It wasn't exactly very welcome in Central Texas either.
No, you're right. Yeah,
people at least knew who I was. Everybody knew. She's in charge of the bug collection when they'd see my car driving down the road. But I have not had the time to glue anything to my Yaris yet. So
got it.
I'm a complete sellout.
For this?
Do you have a picture? But anyway, years and years, Karen was the only other person I knew who actually modified their vehicle. And she was a glue things to the car person.
Yeah.
I think Shugu, wasn't that the one that did you tell me that?
No, I used entirely 100% silicone caulk.
Okay.
And then Gorilla Glue for hard black plastic. Anyway, I used to have a car with a bee sculpture on top that you could ride. It had a bicycle seat on it and leather reins. And then all around the car was plastic bugs glued to it. I thought you used to be able to find it online.
Sam, we also have people in the
Here,
chat
if
asking
you
for your
search
car.
for my maiden name instead, if you search Karen Wetherill Bug Car, you get pictures of my previous one to the blue one. And then there's the Albuquerque Journal. So there are pictures online if you would like to find it. But you'd have to use my maiden name, Wetherill. I've just put it in the chat because it's not a usual spelling, but.
Very good. I always like that.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks.
All right,
everyone.
we'll see you
I'm gonna
next
wrap
week.
up the recording now.
Okay.
All right.
Nice ending.
Glad we documented that.
It was perfect.
Okay. Bye.
Okay. See you, Sam. See you, Karen.
Bye. Thank you.